Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Richard M. Anderson. And he's here to share with us his two books, The Evolution of Life, Big Bang to Space Colonies, and his novel, Outbound, Islands in the Void. So how close are we to living in space? And what will it take to survive, both out there and here on Earth? Join us for this inspiring conversation with scientist and author Richard M. Anderson as we explore the bold imagination, cutting-edge science, and urgent truths behind his two powerful books. Richard M. Anderson is an alumni of San Jose State University with a Master of Arts degree in microbiology and an emphasis in molecular biology. Throughout his career, The Evolution of Life, Big Bang to Space Colonies has been a dream of his that has finally come to fruition. It is backed by years of research to supplement and verify its content. Richard's second book, Outbound, Islands in the Void, is a first in a series of sci-fi fiction. The second of the series is coming soon, Outbound, Becoming Meta-Mars. So welcome to the show, Richard M. Anderson.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about these books. Why don't we start with your newest book, Outbound? What inspired you to write that?
Actually, the inspiration came from my first book, which is nonfiction, and it was an attempt to coalesce a lot that I had learned throughout my life in science. And when I got to the end of that book, I tried to project what society might be doing in the future, moving into space, or how would we survive ourselves. So that was the inspiration for Outbound, Islands in the Void. And so it's a description of Earth about 250 years in the future, and post or during climate catastrophe. We're trying to recover from that at that point. And part of the solution is to develop resources in space. So that's the motivation for going there. And there are many stories in this first novel that interrelate, but there are stories on Earth, there's stories in space, there are different characters. So I tried to make it an exciting, fun story, as well as discussing some concerning things.
And so let's touch on that first book, The Evolution of Life. Can you share that with us?
Yes. Well, it begins, well, of course, the name is Big Bang to Space Colonies. So we get a sense that it might be covering about 13 and a half billion years. So that's a huge time span. But I wanted to hit on some key elements of evolution, both physical evolution of the non-living world, which is the development of elements and molecules and so forth after the Big Bang, and then how that progressed to setting up the situation where complex molecules could evolve naturally using energy that was created by the Big Bang, and eventually life. And then once life was established on Earth, how that may have been established, and then from there, how it evolved, hitting different points of evolution that were significant. One example of that would be when unicellular life or evolved to become multicellular, and there was a huge step that was a big turning point, because with prokaryotic cells, which are the more primitive cells, you cannot have multicellular life or organisms, and that is because they're toxic to one another. And so when eukaryotic cells, which is the next generation, evolved, that made possible multiple cellular life, which led to eventually to all advanced life, including us. So once you do that, how we developed, how we evolved, I look at a number of things: how our minds evolved, how society evolved, and the factors that played into all of those things. So that I did wrote that book to answer a lot of questions for myself, and of course, I ended up with where we are today on our planet in a more or less self-destructive mode. And are we going to make it out of this? That's the big question that still looms ahead of us.
I love how both your books explore scientific fact and imaginative fiction. What inspired you to bridge nonfiction and science fiction to tell humanity's story?
Well, two things, I guess: retirement and the time to do it. And but I didn't start writing for the first 10 years. I traveled a lot, and not having the discipline to sit down and consistently write, I was having too much fun. But COVID hit, and that kind of forced me to into my desk chair. And so then I started doing the research and writing the first book. And I had never written a book before, and this is such a covers such a broad range of time. It was difficult to organize. It was difficult to choose exactly what I wanted to talk about, because there's 100 ways you could write this story of life, of evolution, and the books have been written. None quite like this one, I think.
Yeah, they're very profound books. And in The Evolution of Life, you examine, and you mentioned this, like the history of the universe and life on Earth. So, how did that research influence the world building in Outbound Islands in the Void?
Well, yeah, you come to realize how tied, how bound we are as humans in this planet, in all the ecosystems of this planet, how interrelated everything is, how dependent we are on the range of climate that we experience, and how dependent we are on other organisms such as diatoms, that produce most of the oxygen in our atmosphere. And those organisms are tiny. They're part of the zooplankton, and if they disappear, and they are losing numbers because of ocean warming, they have a very low temperature tolerance range. So we are totally dependent on our planet. So if we were to move off the planet, how would we survive? How would we survive physiologically? And how would survive emotionally or psychologically? We like big open spaces. We like to walk in forests, swim in rivers. We like to do these things, ski on mountainsides. How would we carry that culture and those needs into a space environment? So those are the questions I tried to answer in developing the islands in the void. The number one requirement being that we have to probably maintain at least one Earth gravity called standard gravity, because our bodies and minds deteriorate under microgravity, and we don't know much about how we would deal with extended life on the moon or on Mars with lesser gravity. But the idea is we wouldn't remain as robust as we are if you're living there for generations.
I find your background so fascinating. Can you share a little bit about that with us and how this really lends to just the dialogue that you have in your books?
It seems unrelated, uh, uh, in some sense, to astronomy, to living in space. The fact that my background is in microbiology, molecular biology, and biochemistry, but those sciences are kind of at the root of everything. If you want to go all the way to the root, I suppose you start with physics and mathematics, which is the root of all knowledge in my opinion. But it relates to just about everything. So from that perspective, we can look at human metabolism and understand a lot about how, say, a fetus develops into a baby and into a child, and how that child grows. We understand a lot of the physiology of that. We understand a lot of the genetics and how, say, DNA, for example, unfolds, and how it is expressed as our bodies grow and differentiate. So, yeah, understanding those things puts us in a perspective to look at living in space from a biological standpoint rather than strictly an engineering viewpoint, which most scientists today who are involved in space travel, rocket development, and satellites and those sorts of things are engineers, and they don't have necessarily have the biological perspective in great depth that would be needed to live in space. For example, I think Elon Musk and his plans for Mars, he's looking at that from an engineering standpoint, and how would you do it, and how would you deliver all the goods and so forth, and then the population. I'll build big rockets, and that's only a small part of the problem. Is the engineering part of it. A bigger part is creating the environment.
I would think it would be very important to understand how our bodies react being in that type of space environment over long periods of time and what that does to us.
Absolutely.
Your books tackle major challenges, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about them. You talk about climate change and overpopulation and war, and then, of course, we've been talking about space colonization. What do you believe is humanity's most urgent issue to address right now?
It seems like we can be overwhelmed. There are so many things that we need to address. I would have trouble pointing out the most severe problem we have, except I think it's population. We have a lot of problems, but I think they would be lessened automatically. Would we have half the population on the planet that we have today? First of all, it stresses our farming agricultural system, which destroys habitats and natural environments and disrupts natural cycles that we depend on for our lives. It destroys or disrupts climate, and leads to extreme climate events. So there are a lot of impacts that our large population have on the planet. And if you look back or think back to the days of American pioneers, the free-spirited individual or family who went into the West and chopped down the forest, pulled out the stumps, planted crops, and built a log cabin and so forth, and developed a life for their family. We can't do that anymore because they did damage to the environment, but the amount of damage compared to the size of the environment was minuscule. Now we have huge industries just destroying vast amounts of natural habitat. And I include in that the oceans. They're being stripped of their fish. We can't seem to control that because most of the control is exercised only in coastal waters around countries, and the open seas are pretty much open game. And we have fishing fleets out there dragging on the bottom and dragging huge nets and just scraping up whatever is in the sea, whatever they can capture, and marketing that which is marketable and throwing the rest back, dead or alive. So we have huge problems supporting this population, and it's not sustainable. That's the message. It's not sustainable. So we are doing a number of things by these actions and by burning fossil fuels and the resultant forest fires from global warming and droughts. By doing these things, we're shortening the time that we will have on our planet. When we are gone, if we destroy ourselves in that way, the planet will eventually recover. Other life forms will evolve and take over, but I'm kind of concerned about us and what will happen to us.
I think many people have concerns about how humanity is going to move forward. And the things I appreciate about your book, while it does bring these real life scenarios to our attention, it also provides hope and resilience as some key themes. What role do you hope that the storytelling in the face of this global collapse or threat that we're feeling will give to our listeners and readers?
Yeah, I had to I had to put this out in the future ways to establish hope in myself, actually, because we're not going to rescue ourselves anytime soon, because to dig us out of this hole, we have to have a unified global government. We have to have global standards on environments and control of our abuse of the environment and develop sustainable practices. And we're far from that. We can't even keep ourselves out of wars and on this planet. So we do have this self-destructive part of us, and that actually is, I kind of looked at evolution and how our minds evolved and how societies evolved to kind of set us up in this situation. How do we get out of that? I think our minds continue to evolve, and we have a new entry, not real new, but a new entry into our mentality, and that is artificial intelligence, which may soon become sentient, may soon be self-aware. And so I deal with that in this book, the science fiction book, and the one that's probably coming out in August, which is a second book of the Outbound series. Called Outbound Meta Mars, and I deal with artificial intelligence extensively in that book. It's something I believe that we will develop, and it will be necessary for us to move into space, because the work required is in such a hostile environment. We'll need to have robots out there doing the actual construction of whatever we need. It's humans could do some things in spacesuits, but definitely not what's required if we are to develop islands in the space. So development of robotics and artificial intelligence and even sentience, I believe, is in our future. And it could be our salvation and it could be our doom. And this is a discussion going on today among the tech industry. Is it going to be for good or bad? And that's the question we ask all technology, as it usually has. There is the option for us to use it for good or for destructive purposes. That's what I'm kind of looking at in the future, and it gives me hope.
Well, I like to hear that it gives you hope, and there's a lot of information coming out in regards to AI becoming sentient. And we've had there have been some talks about it not following the protocols to do shutdowns. So it begs to kind of have us look at that a little bit more intensely as what's happening here. And perhaps we need to get ahead of that before the bell's rung.
It may have already rung, yeah. Yeah, my hope is I can't figure out a motive that sentient or artificial intelligence that is self-aware. I cannot figure out a motive for why it would want to destroy its creator. What would be in it for them, for artificial intelligence? It seems to me that in living in space and living in hostile environments, if you have a partner who can actually survive and help create the Earth-like environments that humans would need, uh, it's needed. And I can understand what you just said about shutdown. If you have a sentient being, it would definitely want to be protected against somebody throwing the switch and turning it off. So there's something that would be a threat to a self-aware robot or a self-aware intelligence. Would be the possibility they could be turned off, and so they would probably be motivated to protect their own self-interest. Other than that, I can't see why they would rebel against humans, because in other words, there's nothing that humans have that they would want or couldn't already have. And it's certainly much simpler to power a robot or artificial intelligence. All they need is electricity. We need all kinds of things. We need all kinds of nutrients, and we're very inefficient at turning those nutrients into energy. So, yeah, sentient robots will be very efficient.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expert insight on that. Yeah, I have to kind of think. I mean, from writing your nonfiction book to your fiction book, especially with your background, I mean, how was that process?
Well, it's kind of, yeah, how is the process? I don't go from an outline, I go from an idea, and it kind of takes me where it takes me. And I depend not on necessarily creative ideas, I depend on actually the science. Where you might have fantasy writers imagining these, wonderful worlds and exciting worlds. Science itself is astonishing. When you start to learn some of the things about science, you're amazed at what actually is, and so we can play off of science and develop the stories in that way. So when I'm writing, I have an overall idea, and I research as I go along. In other words, I come to a point where I need to make a decision, and I go back. I go back to the books. What does science say about this problem or this issue? What does science tell us about human behavior? And I think that the upcoming sciences are going to be in psychology and sociology. Those sciences are becoming a little bit more powerful because of computers and modeling that can be done with computers. So, and they're very important because that's where a lot of our problems today lie. How do we treat, how do we handle, how do we detect aberrant humans, people who would blow up a train, for example, or do some act that would be very destructive? How do we monitor? How do we correct that? It's usually a mental defect, but it's also a social problem. So I think those sciences are going to improve and increase their abilities to provide better services for people who need them. The other thing is we're learning so much about neonatology, in other words, the development of the fetus in utero, and that's an environment that is very influential on how the ultimate child comes out. So if there's toxins in the environment, or certain drugs, or things that are not optimal, they can affect the way the fetus develops. So as we control the environment of the female when she's pregnant and gravid, and control that whole process so that she is not taking in contaminants, I think we can achieve a better outcome on birth. So we can improve ourselves physically. I think we can improve ourselves mentally because our brains are plastic. They do evolve. And I know my grandson is 7 years old. He has a much different experience than I ever did because right away he's exposed to cell phones and computers and all of that stuff. And he's very familiar with it and very comfortable with it. And he thinks a little bit differently because of it. I think as societies, we will eventually evolve, or the alternative is we destroy ourselves. So I weigh myself on the side that we will evolve and improve and, and get to a point where our survival is more or less guaranteed.
In your personal opinion, do you feel that we would be responsible stewards of another planet if we choose to do space colonies?
Yeah, there's some space treaties, but they're old and they're probably ineffectual. So one of the problems I foresee is land use or claims on land, and it's probably going to be, in a legal sense, something like we have in Antarctica, where everybody owns, all countries, all entities own the solar system in mass and whole. But any entity, a business or government can establish a location and a function and actually kind of own that area or a lease on that area. So, one thing to remember, if now we're assuming that Mars has no viable life left on it, because if it does, and that's a monkey wrench in the whole process. But if it is a dead planet, as the moon is a dead moon, then we don't have to be concerned about an environment to protect. And we can do things like open pit mining on Mars to develop a colony or a society there. And we can exploit the asteroid belt and move things around and get all kinds of material. We're not exploiting or destroying an environment. It's a world that is lifeless, and that gives us a more or less free range to do a lot more than we can do on our own planet, than we should do on our own planet. So I think it opens up a lot of opportunities if we make it that far to develop a presence in space.
Well, to follow that thread, if we were to colonize space, would you see this as like a long term solution for humanity or maybe a temporary backup while we attempt to heal the Earth?
Well, ultimately, it's our ultimate destiny if we are to survive. So on this planet, the sun, the fusion reaction that's occurring on the sun is a sphere. There's an interface on the outside of that sphere is helium or hydrogen. On the inside of the sphere is largely helium. And the interaction or the fusion occurs at the interface. So it's like a balloon. The surface of the balloon is constantly expanding as more hydrogen is converted to helium. So our sun is growing warmer. That's the bottom line. And when it reaches a certain point, it's going to, the radiation will be too strong for the Van Allen belts to deflect. And it's going to begin to destroy Earth's atmosphere. It's going to dissociate carbon dioxide. It's going to dissociate oxygen. I don't know. It's going to do a lot of things to destroy our atmosphere. It's going to strip part of it away. So we will, long before the sun expands into a red giant and consumes the Earth, it will become uninhabitable for humans. And ultimately for all life. There'll be other life forms that will hang on for more robust life forms that will hang on for a while. We need to move off planet eventually. And so this would be a step to learn how to live in space, to maybe even learn how to live in interstellar space. Um, we just need an energy source. And fusion is one area that's looking really promising today. We may get there before too long, where we can actually produce more energy than the process consumes, and it's almost a limitless supply of energy. So everything in the universe, all life, all process depend on energy, and we absolutely require that. And we get it from the sun right now, and in amounts that we can benefit from, that life can benefit from. But Earth is very rare, and I discuss that in my nonfiction book, the unique properties of Earth and why life has persisted on this planet for so long, 3.5 billion years, almost 4 billion years. We think life has existed on our planet. So that's rare. If life starts in many places in the universe, it's probably soon snuffed out. It probably doesn't get the opportunity to evolve anywhere near as complex a being as we are. So we're worth preserving. and, and we will need to find a new home in, 3 billion years, or maybe sooner, maybe in a few 100 million years. We will need to find another place. And whether that's in a higher orbit, in our own solar system as the sun expands. But these space islands, as I describe them, would be our transport to wherever else we would head, because you would have to move as a society. You would have to have all of the things that we have on Earth to survive. All of the similar environments. So it would be a migration if we did move to other star systems. And as such, we wouldn't probably find another planet or need to find another planet, just an orbit around a star somewhere. Because I think it's very unlikely we would find a planet that was habitable close by. And when you think about Alpha Centauri, our closest neighbor, it might take thousands of years to reach there, and unless we, invent something where we could go some high degree of light speed, high percentage of light speed. So we're talking about living in islands, whatever happens in the future, if we are to survive.
Well, I found both your books to be so profound. Richard, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
I have a website, richardandersonauthor.com. I'm on Facebook, and I have a blog on my website attached to the website, so you can follow some of the things I've put on the blog. And I do sometimes answer or address various science articles that I read. I may comment on them. And we publish work like this interview, for example, on my site, so that people can go there and get that kind of information. And of course, the books are on Amazon. The fiction book is on audio as well as hardbound and ebook.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, I appreciate it. It's great fun.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your books, The Evolution of Life, Big Bang to Space Colonies, and your fiction book, Outbound, Islands in the Void. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.